The sterile white walls of the delivery room reflected a cold, unforgiving light. Each beep, beep of the monitor struck Alexander Royce's heart like a hammer blow. The pain writhing within his wife, Isabella, was matched only by the agony shredding every vein in his own chest. So, if you were forced to choose between two unbearable options, staying by the side of the woman you love or succumbing to a luxurious, tempting invitation, what would you do? Join us as we unravel the pivotal decision of one of Los Angeles' wealthiest millionaires. Mist still clung to the window frame of the delivery room as Isabella gripped the bed rail, each contraction lancing through her body like a razor-sharp blade. Every sound around her warped into a dissonant echo. The hurried footsteps in the corridor, the steady beep, beep of the fetal monitor, and her own ragged breathing. Isabella no longer had the strength to call out her husband's name. Each inhale felt like a strangled scream, every nerve ending numb with pain. Her eyes were rimmed in red, yet they still shone with an iron resolve. A new life awaited beyond this agony. Just outside that closed door, the hospital hallway lay in a hush so thick it felt tangible. Alexander Royce squared his shoulders in his bespoke Tom Ford suit, gold, black, and sharp metallic accents that gleamed like armor. Then leaned against the wall, his frame trembling as he fought back tears that threatened to betray his composed facade. Each beep of the monitor pounded his chest as if a hammer were striking his ribcage, wrenching his heart in an unrelenting vice. A cold bead of sweat traced its way down Alexander's temple. He drew a shuddering breath, yet his lips remained clamped shut, as though he were restraining a storm within. His gaze locked onto the white door. Beyond it, Isabella battled to bring their firstborn into the world. Every passing second felt like a squandered promise, a reminder of the weight of his responsibility. He recalled the countless evenings they'd spent reading childbirth guides together, his gentle hand caressing her pregnant belly as she whispered words of love. Now those tender memories shrank away before the agonizing choice looming before him. In that still moment, his phone's shrill chime jolted him like a punch to the gut. Alexander withdrew the device from the inner pocket of his jacket, his emotions in turmoil. The screen displayed Sophia's name, the PR specialist with lips the color of ripe cherries and hair as black as midnight. Her latest message blinked on the screen. "Can you make it? The Beverly Retreat Lounge is waiting. I need you." The words, "I need you," hung there, a seductive whisper that crushed his heart beneath a tide of overwhelming guilt. His eyes widened, a finger hovering over the accept and decline options. His fatherly duty tugged at one side of his soul. Selfish desire pulled at the other. He envisioned Isabella writhing in pain behind that door, her lips twisted in silent cries, and his chest ached with the imagined sound of her suffering. Yet Sophia, her alluring smile and promise of perfect escape, occupied a powerful corner of his mind. He yearned to vanish into the spa's soothing embrace, to leave the relentless beep behind, to surrender himself to candlelit calm and lilting melodies. Alexander bowed his head, trembling fingers brushing against his abdomen in a reflexive plea for warmth. Another tear rolled down his cheek, mingling with the cold dread tightening his chest. He recalled his mother-in-law's gentle admonition. "Stay by her side, Alexander. Everything else can wait." But that loving counsel now echoed from a distant shore. He had built his empire on bold gambits, on power and wealth. Now, faced with the primal tug of instinct, he realized that boardroom triumphs could never outweigh the birth of his daughter, or quiet the primal roar of a wife in labor. The monitor beeped again, faster, more urgent. The foal's heartbeat fluttered weakly, signaling a crisis. Alexander startled, as if struck by a poisoned arrow. He lifted his phone, burdened by remorse, yet his gaze faltered. In that instant, he pictured himself stepping into the spa's sanctuary, closing the door on worry, sinking into steaming waters, letting Sophia's touch wash away every pang of conscience. But then, vision of Isabella, her gaunt arms gripping the nurse's, eyes clenched shut through another contraction, yanked him back with an undeniable force. He inhaled deeply. His hand, still quaking, tapped the screen to end the call, plunging it into darkness like a silent confession. The distant echo of footsteps drifted along the corridor, but he remained rooted to the spot, heart fused to the door behind which Isabella fought for life. No matter how seductive Sophia's invitation, he had made his choice. He would stay. Standing in that hush, Alexander Royce felt the solitude settle over him like a shroud. Every breath, every droplet of sweat on his suit, tasted of the bitter gravity of his decision. There was no spa music now, no gentle candlelight, only the steady beep and the stifled cry of his wife. In that crucible, the true treasures of life revealed themselves: love, duty, and the fragile gift of existence awaiting his embrace. And so, in that moment of weighty resolve, Alexander Royce lifted his chin and stepped forward, toward the closed door, toward the woman fighting for their child and the new life that hung in the balance. Behind him, the glittering world of temptation lay abandoned, a mere echo of luxury, as he advanced to embrace the promise of a family and the redemption of a father's heart. Alexander trailed the stretcher up to the third floor, the hospital corridor's chill echoing with the steady click of heels on vinyl floors and the acrid sting of antiseptic in the air. Isabella, enduring her fifth contraction, clutched the bed rail, beads of sweat tracing down her forehead and mingling with her silent fear. At her side, Mrs. Margaret, her mother, knelt on trembling knees, her gentle hands massaging Isabella's back as she whispered words of encouragement, as soft as a sigh. "Stay strong, sweetheart. You're almost there." Opposite them, Edward, Isabella's brother, pressed a reassuring hand to her shoulder, his tense gaze nevertheless radiating a quiet certainty, lending her a fragment of familial warmth amid the storm. Alexander stood huddled against the white-painted doorframe, his chest heaving as though he were fighting to contain a tempest of emotion. The door hung ajar, offering him only a partial glimpse of his wife writhing in pain, yet his mind was more tumultuous than ever. His foot hesitated. Instead of stepping forward, he veered down a deserted wing, where fluorescent lights cast a cold, unforgiving glow. His heart would not let him remain rooted there. His mind berated him to act, to choose. In his hand, his smartphone pulsed with a new message. He exhaled sharply, fingers trembling as he swiped open the screen. The Silicon Heights project report, one of his brainchildren, an ambition of billions in real estate towering over the cityscape. Profit curves danced across the display, numbers promising staggering returns. The blue glare of the screen painted distorted shadows across his face, where anxiety and ambition waged a merciless battle. Beneath his tailored Tom Ford jacket, Alexander's ribcage jolted with every echo of Isabella's pain from the monitor. Yet in that same instant, another name glowed on his screen: Sophia. Her latest text read, "Aren't you coming? The VIP lounge at the Beverly Retreat is waiting for you. I need you." Those 4 words pierced his heart like a dagger. Seductive, relentless, cruel. He had paused to review company figures even as he wavered between the vow to stand by his wife's side at the moment of birth and the lure of a decadent escape beckoning him. Inside Alexander's mind, a battlefield raged. Each time Isabella moaned through another contraction, he felt as if she carried the weight of his own betrayal. He recalled her steadfast eyes when they whispered potential baby names, her tender strokes across her rounded belly on quiet evenings. Yet beside that resolute love, there stood Sophia, the enchanting PR specialist, whose smile brimmed with promise, like a tidal wave threatening to pull him away. And beneath it all rang the relentless hum of opportunity. The deal of a lifetime awaits. The city's skyline belongs to you." That was the voice of a man schooled in calculation. The cries of his wife, however, stirred the heart of a husband and a father. He closed the message, but the chaos persisted. His shoulders sagged under the weight of unseen guilt. Placing the phone back into his breast pocket, he took a cautious step toward the delivery room door, only to halt and turn away in silence. In that moment, his spectacles reflected a stranger's face. Glass dark rims framing eyes hollow with fatigue, lips pressed in a line of weariness etched by sleepless nights. He questioned himself. Was he sacrificing too much? Before he could answer, Isabella's faint, anguished cry cleaved through his thoughts. Alexander drew a deep, shuddering breath, attempting to bury his turmoil deep within. The hospital door stood as a fragile boundary between duty and temptation, between love and ambition. He lingered there, fingertips brushing the doorknob, yet he did not turn it. His heart screamed, "Go in, she needs you," while his mind thundered, "Stay here, finish Silicon Heights, this is your empire." Time seemed to halt. The monitor's beeps accelerated, a siren for an emergency. Edward burst into the corridor, dialing for a doctor, and Mrs. Margaret sobbed quietly, pressing a hand to her lips to stifle her grief. Alexander watched, his veins aflame with remorse. Finally, he inched forward, only to stop once more, as though each step weighed down his very soul. In an instant, a memory washed over him. A stroll along Santa Monica Pier at dusk. Isabella's arm looped through his, her laughter drifting on the salt air, each breath of ocean breeze promising serenity. He remembered feeling invincible in her presence. Now, he stood in the sterile hush of a hospital, his heart emptied like a coat hung on an empty hook. Both he and his world squeezed between two irreconcilable forces. Then Alexander exhaled, wagering his entire life on the next move. He pivoted, retreating to the window alcove where the wan light bled onto his ashen face. He lifted his phone once more, Sophia's name still lingering on screen. For a fleeting moment, he hesitated, but then, with resolute finality, he closed the phone and withdrew his hand, turning on his heel toward the door. He approached the delivery room, his hand trembling as it clasped the doorknob. His wife's pain reverberated in his mind like judgment, her voice a clarion call to his conscience. He shut his eyes, drew in a ragged breath, and gripped the door firmly. Then, with a determined heave, he opened it and stepped inside. Every ambition left unpursued, every lure of luxury abandoned. Before him stood only Isabella and the nascent life she fought to bring into the world. The fluorescent lights at Cedar Sinai cast an icy glow, illuminating every bead of sweat glistening on Isabella's brow as she writhed through another contraction. The steady beep, beep of the monitor rang out like an urgent alarm, driving Alexander's heart into a frenzied rhythm. Each step of the nurse's heels echoed on the cold tile, while sterilized fluids trickled through clear tubing, leaving faint rivulets on the floor, a stark reminder of life's fragility. The air felt stifling, heavy with antiseptic fumes that wrapped around him like an invisible shroud, constricting his chest. He remembered Isabella's fierce determination, her eyes clamped shut against the pain, and the single tear that slipped down her cheek when that fifth wave of agony crashed over her. In that moment, Alexander could no longer perceive color or depth in the corridor, only sound and the looming terror of what was at stake. While Isabella summoned every last ounce of breath to endure, Alexander slipped out of the delivery room, retreating into a quiet corner of the hallway. The fluorescent glow there was dimmer, but still enough to reveal him hunched inside his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, armored attire that now felt meaningless. His heartbeat seemed to pause as he saw his reflection in the strip of glass beside the monitor. A pale, drawn face marked by lines too deep for a man of his age. eyes wide with confusion, stripped of their usual confidence. In his hand, his smartphone pulsed with a fresh alert. The Silicon Heights project report. His billion-dollar vision for reshaping the city's skyline. Profit projections danced across the screen, each figure a direct strike at his avarice, an opportunity too monumental to ignore. Standing at the threshold of triumph, he felt his heart tremble, torn between two worlds. Before he could steady himself, the monitor's staccato pace quickened, as if the unborn child itself cried out in distress. Isabella was still locked in her ordeal, sweat glistening on her skin as she moaned in silent agony. Memories of softer times, reading prenatal books together, her gentle hand resting on her rounded belly, her laughter trailing off in shared anticipation, flooded his mind, each recollection a 1,000-pointed dagger. Yet still, he could not erase the blinking message from Sophia. "Where are you?" "I'm waiting in the VIP lounge. I need you." Those words tempted him toward a world utterly different from this antiseptic crucible. Crossing the threshold into the Beverly retreat, Alexander felt as if he'd stepped through a portal. A gentle piano melody drifted through the air, petals of lavender-scented steam swirling in the warmth. A crystalline whirlpool glimmered beneath the soft candlelight, each bubble's rise a whispered promise of oblivion. Sophia reclined on a sumptuous white leather chaise, her eyes blazing with confidence, her fingers brushing the rim of a chilled champagne flute in a beckoning gesture. Here, there was no beep, no groans of pain, only the silky hush of indulgence. He felt the spa's warmth seep into his bones, the heady scent intoxicating his senses. And yet in that instant he was yanked back by the memory of Isabella in labor, her arms entwined with the nurse's, eyes squeezed shut through each relentless contraction. He heard the muffled cries again, felt the weight of guilt pooling in his veins, stealing his breath. His exile in luxury collided violently with his duty. One half of him drowned in desire, the other screamed for responsibility. The retreat's every detail, flickering candles, languid melodies, chilled bubbles, was designed to lull the mind. Yet the monitor's persistently urgent beeps clung to his consciousness like shackles. Sophia smiled as he entered, her gaze alight in the candle glow as though she deciphered his inner turmoil. But Alexander only felt the crushing weight of his betrayal. He glanced past her, catching a faint reflection of the hospital monitor in the spa's glass panel, perceiving Isabella's unceasing struggle on the other side of town. He drew in a sharp breath, the sting of his guilt severing his composure. He remembered that night on Ocean Avenue, choosing the name Aurora beneath the moonlit sky, Isabella's tears of joy as she heard their lullaby echo through her womb. Was this fleeting pleasure worth the price of that joy? He wondered. With trembling hands, Alexander set his glass on the table, wiping his mouth where the champagne clung with a guilty sheen. His lips tasted of regret, not emptiness. He reached out to touch Sophia's arm, a moment's attempt at reassurance, but found only cold indulgence. The spa's glamour peeled away in an instant, revealing itself as a glittering trap, imprisoning his conscience. He realized he'd come perilously close to crossing the line. One more step, and there would be no return. Before his resolve crumbled completely, Alexander closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, gathering the fragments of his will. The beep-beep echoed in his mind, each pulse tightening around his heart. He stole one last glance at Sophia, withdrew his hand, and stepped back from the white leather chaise, leaving behind the flickering candlelight and half-finished champagne. He turned his back on the swirling vortex of luxury, striving to steady his breath, even as every cell in his body reeled from remorse. He crossed the plush carpet and exited the VIP suite, the automatic door whispering shut behind him like a death knell for his selfish yearnings. His heart jolted at the thought of Isabella lying in that sterile room, awaiting his return, the child they created poised to emerge. Responsibility enveloped him like a vice, an invisible whip lashing him back to reality. In that decisive moment, Alexander knew where he truly belonged. Back at Cedars Sinai, at the threshold of birth, ready to stand where it mattered most. Alexander pushed open the sliding door of the Beverly retreat and stepped into a sanctuary crafted for the perfect escape. Warm light danced across amber-brown wood grains, while the scent of lavender essential oil mingled with sandalwood, enveloping him in a sweet invitation. His eyes sparkled with 1,000 flickers, excitement tangled with anxiety, as he crossed the gleaming marble floor. Every footfall muffled by the soft echo of plush slippers, each step urging him away from the tension-laden world of the hospital. Sophia emerged the moment he entered the grand foyer. She wore a diaphanous black silk robe that draped her slender, intoxicating figure, candles flickering on a carved wooden shelf tracing every sensuous curve of her form. Her crimson lips, glistening like polished crystal, seemed to beckon him closer. Alexander's gaze drifted to the awaiting flute of champagne on the marble table, the tiny bubbles hissing up the glass's rim in a soft, tantalizing whisper. He lifted the cool crystal to his lips, the chill kissing his mouth before the velvety champagne flooded his tongue, dissolving into heady illusions of indulgence. Sophia's fingertips traced the rim as she watched him, her eyes glittering in the candlelight. Her long lashes fluttered, her lips parted in a teasing curve. He felt his heart skip a beat before roaring back to life. Inside him, the hospital's monitor still moaned. Beep, beep. A reminder he could not ignore. Yet Sophia's voice, velvety soft, murmured in his ear. "You look tired, Alexander. Let me loosen your tension." Every word she breathed was an electric current against his skin, sending shivers of both fear and longing through him. The private room was draped in wispy white chiffon curtains, a gentle breeze stirring the fabric in a dance of light and shadow. Alexander's senses flared. The glow of warm amber lamps, the melody of gentle piano, the intoxicating fragrance settling into the air, and the sound of his own labored breath. Sophia's hand settled on his shoulder, once firm with pride, now yielding beneath her cool touch. She guided him toward the white leather chaise longue, its plush cushioning promising unlimited release. Each piano key struck a chord of conflicting emotions: desire, guilt, exhilaration. Sophia leaned forward, her lips brushing Alexander's wrist, imparting a sweet warmth. He closed his eyes, attempting to swallow the turmoil within. Every stroke of her hand felt like a blade slicing into the responsibility ready to shatter. He remembered Isabella in the delivery room, the raw moans melding with the monitor's urgent beeps, every sense torn between the pull of pleasure and the cry for life. Alexander shifted, seeking retreat, but Sophia's grip tightened, her gaze as fathomless as the ocean. She leaned in, her breath a soft gasp against his ear. "Just forget everything," she whispered. But he could not forget. Isabella needed him. Aurora was about to be born. The promises they'd whispered on countless nights still echoed in his heart. Those memories lashed at him like a whip, compelling him to turn away. The champagne flute stood half full on the table, froth clinging to the glass's bottom like the residue of unatoned sin. Alexander reached for it, but his hand paused, pushing it away instead. Sophia's eyes narrowed in disappointed amusement as she slid toward him. But the glamour of the Beverly retreat dissolved before his eyes into a gaudy maze imprisoning his conscience. He recoiled, realizing he had walked too close to the edge. One more step and he would plunge beyond redemption. His breath grew ragged, sweat beating on his brow as he felt the weight of a weary warrior after an endless battle. Sophia blinked in surprise, and Alexander seized a towel, dabbing at the perspiration, an echo that he too was exhausted, not by strain of the body, but by the torment of his soul. He turned to go, each stride heavy as lead. The music still lingered, the whirlpool's bubbles shimmering behind the frosted glass, the lavender scent thick in the air. Yet Alexander saw only Sophia's fading silhouette, a specter of temptation. He asked himself, can this momentary escape erase Isabella's cries? Can it erase the agony of childbirth? Can it erase my duty as husband and father? No. Deep within, he knew the truth. Every indulgence buried him deeper in regret. At last, Alexander drew a long, steadying breath, his eyes fixed on the exit. His trembling fingers parted the chiffon curtain, stepping out of that gilded cage. He left behind the flickering candles and lilting piano, behind the phantom allure of the spa, and re-embraced the persistent hum of the hospital monitor in his mind. He knew where he belonged, beside Isabella, at the threshold of the most sacred moment of their lives. And so, Alexander forsook the siren call of luxury, hurrying down the spa corridor, heart settling into a steady rhythm that matched the monitor's beeps. Each step carried him back to Cedars-Sinai, back to the unwavering bond of love and the solemn duty no spa, no matter how lavish, could ever replace. The luxurious ambience of the spa still lingered in Alexander's mind when the rapid beeping of respirators and distant screams from across the city swept over him like a storm. He had barely taken a step out of the grand lobby when his phone blasted through his suit pocket. A dozen missed calls from Edward, from Mrs. Margaret, followed by an avalanche of frantic messages. Isabella! Hemorrhaging! The doctor says an emergency hysterectomy. Aurora is born prematurely. Each line of text felt like a dagger twisting in his chest. Alexander froze, his heart racing out of control. The half-empty glass of champagne on the spa counter, its golden remnants clinging to the sides, looked like a vessel of smoldering guilt. He glanced up at the ceiling, struggling to contain the chaos of grief, panic, and shame that threatened to overwhelm him. His breathing turned ragged, beads of cold sweat forming on his brow. He wondered, only moments ago, he had immersed himself in this fleeting illusion of luxury, and now all had shattered. He caught sight of himself in a mirror, once the embodiment of confidence in his tailored suit, now a pale, hollow-eyed man whose face bore the strain of age far beyond his years. Alexander realized he must run back to Cedars-Sinai. But his legs felt weighted in lead, each step a laborious trudge. His footsteps merged with the frantic throb of his mental electrocardiogram. Beep, beep, beep. Bursting from the spa lobby, the late afternoon sun of Los Angeles flooded the glass doors with harsh yellow light. This was the glare of reality, relentless and merciless. Alexander hastened to his waiting luxury car, his chest tightening so violently he feared he would collapse. On the drive back, every traffic signal seemed to conspire against him, each red light a barbed challenge to his desperation. He rounded corner after corner, steering with trembling hands, his mind singularly fixated. Isabella. After only a few minutes of escape, Alexander realized that distance did not dull his anguish. It only deepened his regret. The scent of leather wrapped around the steering wheel, the engine's growl, wind rushing through the open window, all carried the bitter tang of his culpability. He recalled the muted hiss of spa jets, but those sounds faded, replaced by the insistent rhythm of the hospital monitor. Beep, beep, beep. The final echo stamped on his memory. When he reached the third floor of Cedars-Sinai, the corridor blazed under emergency lights. Alexander burst through the delivery room door, and the sight before him shattered his soul. Isabella curled into herself on the bed, her arms empty and distant from the stretcher's rails, eyes squeezed shut, lips pressed tight against each agonized breath. At her side, Mrs. Margaret clutched her daughter with a terror-stricken embrace, while Edward sank to the floor, cradling a pillow as though it contained their fragile hope. The doctor's hushed instructions cut the air. "Where is her husband? Please close the door. We must maintain silence." Alexander lunged forward, grasping his wife's hand. Isabella's skin was ice cold, slick with sweat and antiseptic. That touch felt like a razor's edge cutting into him. She opened her eyes and locked onto his, wide, horrified, silently demanding, "Why?" Alexander could not form an apology. He collapsed to his knees, his shoulders trembling with remorse. Dr. Miller stepped in, her voice steady yet urgent. We must perform a hysterectomy to save her life. Her survival is paramount." Machines whirred and beeped in a frenzy around them. Isabella braced herself through the pain, tears streaking down her cheeks. Alexander held her as she fought for each breath. Tears streamed down his face. In that moment, he saw their future ripped apart. No second child, Isabella's body forever altered, and only Aurora's fragile life hanging in the balance. The pediatric team assembled in rushed harmony, the nurse's footsteps a tense rhythm. Alexander's world narrowed to the erratic thump of his own heart, the bright red of fresh blood staining the white sheets, the fragile gasps of their newborn. After the emergency surgery, baby Aurora cried out, a frail cry that merged with the soft beeps of the neonatal monitor. She was tiny and red, her skin translucent, her little fists clutching the nurse's finger. Isabella, spent beyond description, lay dazed on the operating table, her sight fixed not on the sterile overhead lights, but on the white drape shielding her new daughter. Alexander knelt beside her, hand trembling against the stainless steel rail, sharing in her anguish. Those frantic moments passed in an instant yet etched themselves into Alexander's memory, as though a millennium had slipped by. He realized his selfishness had exacted the gravest price, the very life of the woman he loved most. Aurora was swiftly transferred to the neonatal intensive care unit. Alexander followed every step, guilt weighing so heavily he could barely breathe. He pressed his forehead against the glass observation window, staring at his daughter lying exposed beneath the cold glow of the blue incubator light, machines whispering and beeping, wires entwined around her tiny form. Outside the nursery, Edward and Mrs. Margaret waited in silence. Mrs. Margaret's gaze met Alexander's, a swirl of sorrow, anger, and compassion. She offered a subtle nod, as if to comfort him, even though his betrayal could not be overlooked. Edward said nothing. His broad shoulders slumped under the burden that once belonged equally to both brothers. Alexander bowed his head. The words, "I'm sorry," lodged painfully in his throat. In the hush of the hospital storm, Alexander understood the true value of presence, not in glory or power, but in the quiet moments beside those who most need us. And no matter how desperately he tried, he could not rewind time to undo the few fateful minutes he had squandered. Remorse surged through him, irrevocable. He knew he would carry its weight for the rest of his life. Alexander stepped out of the intensive care unit, his eyes hollow with desperation in the stifling hospital corridor, the restraining order glaring on his phone screen, barring him from approaching Isabella and their daughter within a 500-foot radius, struck his heart like an ice-cold bucket of water. Every plea for compassion, every explanation of his momentary panic and selfish flight had been mercilessly shut down by that legal document. Labeled the husband who abandoned his wife in her hour of greatest peril, Alexander felt each of his steps weigh him down like lead. The bleached corridors, speckled with harsh overhead lights, and the rows of glass-paneled doors now seemed to leer at him with silent judgment. Before he could gather himself, the divorce petition landed on his desk. 2 charges, adultery and emotional abandonment, plus Isabella's demand for full custody of Aurora. He had handed his wife the weapon of betrayal. Now she used it to dismantle their shared future. His name, stamped in bold on the court papers, read like the heading of a criminal indictment. In the blink of an eye, the silent shareholders in the quarterly report shifted their expressions from trust to shock. Rumors of his scandal had rattled the family's reputation, driving the Sterling Empire to the brink. The gleaming offices, once symbols of power and possibility, now felt like a prison of glass and chrome, each footstep echoing with whispers of contempt. Alexander returned to the corporate headquarters, once a temple of ambition and influence. His fingertips grazed the cool leather of his desk, now chilling like an unforgiving wound. The board had convened an emergency meeting. Faces of investors floated in the video feed, disappointment shining more fiercely than anger. All expansion plans for Silicon Heights had been put on indefinite hold. His signature, once the final seal on billion-dollar deals, no longer carried weight. Every contract, every sterling seal, once synonymous with authority, now lay silent. Through the corridors he heard a single refrain. He dug his own grave. Each morning he slipped into the building through a service entrance, seeking to avoid the startled and disdainful glances of staff. As the elevator doors opened, he caught his reflection in the darkened glass. Once the polished executive, now gaunt, his suit rumpled and hollowed. The gray eyes that once shone with fierce ambition now only reflected the wreckage of his pride. Alexander still opened his inbox out of habit, but the messages were all resignation letters and demands for corporate restructuring without him. His name no longer mattered. At midday, he wandered past the office coffee bar, where colleagues once greeted him, now a sea of averted eyes. The bitter cappuccino he nursed tasted like the acrid sting of his own downfall. He reminded himself of the rules. Never come within 500 feet of the hospital. No texts, no phone calls. Yet every ring of his phone, an unknown number, made him flinch. Even the soft ping of an incoming message sent his heart into anxious leaps, wondering if it was Isabella setting a time to see Aurora. Loneliness enveloped him in every sense. Alexander woke in night terrors, his heart pounding as he dreamed of Isabella's and Aurora's cries echoing through his mind, only to awaken to the cruel reality that he was forbidden to comfort his daughter, forbidden to hold his wife. The penthouse at the top of Sterling Tower, once alive with family laughter, now only housed the sound of wind whistling through drawn curtains. The king-sized bed lay empty, 2 pillows side by side, one a memory, the other an invisible barrier erected by law. He sought refuge in the gym, attempting to lift the weight of his stress with each dumbbell press, but every repetition replayed his guilt. The mirrored wall reflected not the confident titan he'd been, but a broken man biting back tears. Power could not save Isabella. Wealth could not shield his daughter. Reputation could not rewind time. He left the gym soaked in sweat, but the ache in his chest would not wash away. By late afternoon, Alexander found himself at his lawyer's office, an unwelcome ritual. New documents were drafted without pause. Visitation negotiations, property disputes, confidentiality clauses. Each signature he appended scorched his last hopes of reconciliation. Each clause he struck deepened the fissure in his already shattered heart. His attorney regarded him with weary sympathy, as though bearing witness to a man sentenced to life in perpetual regret. Alexander closed his eyes, bowed his head, as if receiving a lifelong verdict of penance. As the day drew to a close, he walked alone down the empty corridor. Outside, Los Angeles sparkled with nightlife, concerts, and events. Yet he could not partake. His world shrank to the confines of that 500-foot restriction, a stark reminder that love, duty, and presence cannot be measured by any contract or court order. He understood, at last, that this was not merely a legal punishment, but a moral reckoning, one he would carry for the remainder of his days. The moment Alexander stepped into the supervised visiting room, he felt as though he had entered an alien dimension, where every sound was muffled behind the panes of soundproof glass. The automatic door slid shut behind him, and the outside world, city lights, honking horns, the relentless rush of life, vanished in an instant. Only a small, pale beige room remained, softly lit by recessed ceiling lights, where he would see his daughter just twice a week. On the other side of the glass, Aurora lay nestled on a plush fabric chair, surrounded by cream-colored pillows. She wore a pristine white bodysuit, her tiny hand raised as if to wave hello. When she spotted Alexander, her brow furrowed, her clear blue eyes studying this unfamiliar face. In that instant, his heart twisted. He pressed his large, weathered hand against the glass, feeling her heartbeat thrum through each millimeter of the barrier. Guilt weighed on his shoulders like a physical burden, making every breath a labored whisper. He moved closer and sat down in the chair opposite her, forcing a tentative smile to ease the tension. But the smile was brittle, devoid of warmth, unable to bridge the distance between them. Aurora tilted her head, her little lips parting in a silent question rather than a laugh. He recalled her fragile form in the ICU, wires wrapped around her tiny frame, her feeble cries of life. Now she was stronger, yet those eyes still held a flicker of uncertainty, as though silently asking, "Why isn't Daddy here with me?" Gingerly, Alexander reached out to the glass and aligned his little finger with Aurora's, forging a silent bridge between their worlds. The gulf of separation tore at him. The strong, confident hand he had always relied upon now stood motionless, facing a hand as delicate as butterfly wings. He felt his heart shatter when he realized that very hand had failed to grasp the chance to be by his daughter's side at her first breath. Silence stretched on. Behind him, through the frosted glass, Edward and Mrs. Margaret watched. Edward stood with arms crossed, his gaze mixing concern and impatience, edged with a harshness born of indignation. His brother forced to keep his distance from his own niece. Mrs. Margaret's expression was gentler. Her eyes glistened with compassion, and she offered him an encouraging nod, silently urging, "You can do this. You still have a chance." Yet not a word passed her lips. Alexander folded his hands in his lap, launching a silent conversation. He tried to straighten his shoulders, placing his palm over his heart as if to embed his pulse into Aurora's memory. Then, from his inner jacket pocket, he withdrew a tiny pastel teddy bear blanket. He slid it beneath the glass, and moments later, Aurora reached out on tiptoes, her tiny fingers brushing the fabric. A fragment of his shame seemed to lift as he watched her giggle, clutching the soft cloth to her chest. But the tranquil interlude was fleeting. The clock mounted on the wall chimed, announcing the end of visiting time. Alexander rose unsteadily, his heart skipping at the sudden surge of adrenaline. He pressed a kiss against the glass, eyes closed to forestall tears. Aurora, with a hint of sorrow, raised her hand in farewell. The automatic door opened, casting him back into an abyss of emptiness the instant he stepped out. In the corridor, Alexander slumped forward, hands braced against the cold glass, feeling its chill seep into his bones. His shadow stretched out before him, a gaunt visage that seemed decades older than his years. He exhaled a heavy sigh, more weighty than any lament. He knew that each precious moment spent with his daughter in that brief 2-hour window was a test of conscience. How many mistakes remained unatoned? How many promises yet unfulfilled? Meanwhile, Isabella had embarked on her new life, her hair cropped short, her gaze resolute, her smile steady. He remembered the last time he saw her, lying on the operating table, summoning all her strength through the agony. Now, on social media, she posted pictures of herself well and strong, posing with Edward and baby Aurora, his chest clenched with remorse at her triumph over the storm, while he floundered in his own darkness. Alexander covertly glanced toward the room where Isabella had recovered. Through the thin wall, he heard the laughter of mother and daughter. "Mommy, I love you," a phrase as sweet as honey. He longed to hear that for himself. Yet the restraining order still loomed, invisible but heavier than any chain. He pictured himself embracing his daughter, watching his wife beam with pride, but all of it remained a hazy dream. Sliding behind the wheel of his waiting Range Rover, Alexander sat motionless, fingers gripping the steering wheel. Beyond the windshield, the city lights twinkled as life surged on. He squeezed the wheel, eyes rising to the road ahead, as if willing himself to cut through that 500-foot barrier and the layers of legal prohibitions separating him from his family. But reality reminded him, wounds do not heal swiftly. The lonely memory of the supervised visiting room would haunt him in sleep and awake. Softly, he whispered, "You will understand when you're older. Daddy loves you." But he knew the words drifted to Aurora on the other side of the glass, fragile as smoke dissolving into the air. In that moment, his entire existence crystallized into 2 brief visits a week. A relentless struggle not only with outside constraints, but with his own fractured soul, torn between the desire to make amends and the inescapable grip of unbreakable regret. From the summit of power to the abyss of regret in the blink of an eye, the real estate empire to which Alexander had devoted his entire being collapsed in an instant. News spread like a cyclone. Major partners withdrew without mercy. The Silicon Heights contract stalled, and the stock price plummeted in sorrow. Each project cancellation announcement struck his pride like a needle, awakening the haunting truth. He had destroyed everything with his own hands. Along the neon-lit streets of Los Angeles, Alexander trudged forward like a sleepwalker. The night wind slipped through his collar, carrying the scent of cigarette smoke, the distant wail of taxi horns, and the pulsing electronic beats from open bars. The glaring red neon reflected on his gaunt, hollowed face, as if revealing a skeletal husk, and his eyes, once so vibrant, now resembled deep wells brimming with unshed tears. He might have thought himself lost in a vibrant metropolis, but in reality he wandered only within the shell of his own ruined past. The penthouse atop Sterling Tower, once the site of gilded soirees and gatherings of the powerful, now lay dormant, a ruined fortress. Heavy velvet drapes that once concealed a prized view of the Hollywood Hills now gathered dust, a testament to muted laughter long gone. The cold expanse of marble and hardwood underfoot bore the imprints of hurried footsteps from a former life. Floor-to-ceiling windows, once portals to success, now served as mirrors reflecting a solitary figure bereft of purpose. Sliding his hand along the windowsill, Alexander exhaled heavily as he looked down upon the city still awake below. 1,000 lights that had once symbolized his triumph now stared back at him without compassion. He closed his eyes and wondered, what was the real value he had pursued? Reputation? Wealth? Ambition? When all had fallen away, he realized none of it could save his name, and no amount of money could repurchase the moments he had exchanged. His steps carried him to the great drawing room, where a deep brown silk rug stretched across the floor. On the crystal table remained a half-finished glass of champagne, the last remnant of his indulgent afternoon at the spa. What once offered fleeting ecstasy now stood as the monument to a fatal mistake. Alexander bent down, lifted the glass, and studied the tiny bubbles clinging to the bottom like drops of crimson regret. He set the glass back down, the clink of crystal a stark reminder. The past could not be erased. In the solitude that followed, memories of Isabella and Aurora flooded his mind. He recalled Isabella's determined gaze when she first held his hand, Aurora's coos from the bassinet, and the tear of joy that had slid down Isabella's cheek when their daughter was born. Those moments had been priceless diamonds. Now they were shards tearing into his heart. Alexander pressed his palms to his temples, guilt surging through his chest, leaving him aching to scream, though his voice remained trapped in his throat. He had failed them, failed himself. His phone buzzed insistently. Alexander swiped to see the 10th notification. All authorizations for Mr. Alexander Royce have been temporarily suspended. He collapsed onto the sofa, shoulders shaking. Stacks of legal documents still towered on his desk, restraining orders barring him from Isabella and Aurora, a finalized divorce petition, custody demands, and property disputes. Each pristine page felt like an electric shock to his heart, reminding him over and over. This was a lifelong sentence. He had believed in justice tempered by mercy, but no plea could justify his moment of selfishness. Alexander rose, pacing the room as though hunting his own conscience. Every footstep echoed emptily. "What have you done?" The only sound answered him was the wind rushing past the curtains. He approached the grand piano in the corner, his fingers brushing a white key, the fractured melody pleading for a forgiveness that would never come. He sat and improvised a somber refrain, imagining Isabella beside him and Aurora on her lap, the three of them lost in harmony. But it was all a dream. Night fell, and the city grew silent. Alexander opened a window and drew in the cool air. The Los Angeles skyline, unchanged, shone with barely a glimmer. It no longer sparkled as it once had. He closed the window, the penthouse lights dimming into darkness. In that shadow, Alexander faced himself again, the hollow man who had squandered love, happiness, and identity. Yet at the nadir of his despair, he realized something profound. Life does not always follow a perfect script, and mistakes can become the deepest lessons. Isabella had taught him the meaning of sacrifice and unconditional love. Aurora, with her clear, trusting eyes, taught him patience and the weight of a father's duty. He understood that no matter how devastating the fall, the crucial act was to rise, to confront reality, and to seek redemption. Alexander placed his hand over his heart, the reservoir of countless dreams and, now, endless remorse. He exhaled, eyes lifted to the night sky, as if sending out a promise. I will not give up. Though storms had torn his life apart, he knew he must continue forward, guided by the lesson that a moment's weakness can destroy a lifetime, but awakening can spark new hope. Thank you for watching this tragic conclusion. If Alexander's story has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We invite you to leave a comment. Tell us where and when you're watching in the United States. Your feedback means the world to us. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and loved ones. You might help them recognize the true value of love and responsibility. We look forward to your thoughts and shares.